China launched a war against the free world, while America turned a blind eye. Now, China's political warfare is everywhere. Is the battle lost, or can we still fight back? This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, here in Taipei, Taiwan. When the Cold War ended, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief, completely forgetting about the other massive communist power threatening the world, the Chinese Communist Party. Through a sophisticated use of what they call political warfare, the Chinese regime was able to slowly subvert democracies around the world, including the United States and Taiwan. I sat down with Chinese political warfare expert Professor Kerry Gershaneck to talk about how we all got trapped in China's red matrix. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me here today.
Absolutely. So you're an expert on Chinese Communist Party political warfare. First, what is political warfare?
Political warfare from the People's Republic of China perspective is the number one way it is going to destroy the democracy on Taiwan. It is the number one way it will usurp the United States as the leading global superpower, though, the way it will bring down the hegemon, and so it can become the hegemon. It's the goal of political warfare is to do all that without fighting, that is, without going kinetic in a mid-intensity or high-intensity conflict. You use political means, you use influence. Malign influence is a term that you'll hear often, but it's much more than simple malign influence. It's all the means that that a communist, fascist, totalitarian regime based on Leninist terror as a means of executing your policies, state can use.
So I know a lot of terminology around political warfare, like gray zone operations or comprehensive coercion. I think that's pretty confusing to a lot of your average audience. How would you explain it to, like, my mom?
You're absolutely right. The lexicon, the terminology that surrounds what is in reality this war that we are in. China is at war with us, and we don't understand it because we don't understand the terminology. We, America, and Taiwan, the Republic of China, all too often we think in terms of discrete functions such as diplomacy. We think in terms of information operations. We think in terms of psychological operations. There's a whole array of terminology. You've addressed gray zone operations, but there's proxy armies. There's a whole array of terms that get stovepiped in our thinking. Our policy leaders, our elected officials, don't understand that these aren't just discrete functions from the PRC perspective. The PRC is waging war against us. They're waging what we would call in the military combined arms warfare. They're using every asset they have, every component, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Special Operations. Okay, apply that to political warfare. It's psychological operations, special measures, again, going back to their mentors. This Chinese Communist Party mentors was originally Lenin and then Stalin and the Soviet Union. So it's the active measures or special measures that they use to include assassination, kidnapping, proxy armies, violence, coercive efforts to influence and to change the behavior of other countries, of other groups, of their own people to conform with exactly what the CCP wants them to do. Our terminology, frankly, is really undermining our ability to fight back effectively against the political war that's being waged against us.
Why is the Chinese Communist Party doing this? I mean, why can't we just get along?
Excellent question that I know that you know the answer to, but for the benefit of your audiences worldwide who may not fully understand the issue, no one cares if we're dealing with a, quote, rising Canada. No one cares if we're dealing with a rising Brazil. No one cares if we're dealing even with a rising Republic of China.
I care about a rising Canada. Okay. I never trusted them.
And, you know, as well you should, but again, the maple leaf on that flag flying overhead doesn't instill as much fear in me as seeing the flag of the People's Republic of China flying over Taiwan or Washington, D.C. And here's why. The country we're dealing with, the state, every word here I'm going to say is important. It is an increasingly militarily and economically powerful, hyper-nationalistic, expansionist, fascist, totalitarian regime. All the other countries, Canada included, are democracies. They're self-correcting. If the Republic of China next week decided we're going to build a 550-ship Navy, twice the size of the U.S. Navy, guess what? The regime that's in power would be out of power come next election because the people, again, self-correcting, they're going to vote out people that improperly utilize national assets, national treasure to build militaries that you don't need for peacetime defense. People's Republic of China isn't building a military for peacetime defense. They're using it for coercion. They're using it for expansion. Again, the nature of the regime counts, and this is what so many American academics and a lot of policymakers, include foreign policy and foreign service officers and even military personnel, certainly a lot of professors. I mean, it's what they don't get. We're not dealing with a benign country. The rise of China, we can accommodate that. We can make them like us. No, we can't. It is, again, it's a very dangerous state that we're dealing with, and it has no intention of being co-opted and turned into a democratic country that respects rule of law, respects human rights, respects democracy. Everything they do in terms of suppressing their people, censoring our thoughts overseas, setting up proxy armies, say, for example, in Myanmar, the largest non-state military force and most effective in Asia and arguably much of the world is the United State Army. It influences every decision made by the government of Myanmar, or Burma as we call it in America. Well, where are they getting those brand new tanks? Where are they getting those brand new helicopters, those brand new uniforms, the AKs coming out of the crates still in Cosmoline? They didn't just fall off the lorry of some PRC, a PLA truck in southern Yunnan. It's being provided on a systematic basis, along with the education, training, facilities, all the other things the United State Army needs to be a coercive proxy army within the borders of Myanmar. So this is the nature of the beast we're dealing with. So that's why we care. The nature of the regime here is incredibly intimidating, it's totalitarian, and it's not one we can afford to let win. And hence, we must do a much better job of fighting on the political warfare battlefields.
So I think this is a very important point that you're touching on, that political warfare is not the same as the normal kind of competition that all countries engage in.
Political warfare is war. And that is how the PRC sees it. They're waging war against us. Now think back about 20 years ago. There was a fellow running around in Southwest Asia who was saying, America, I'm at war with you. I'm at war with you. I'm going to kill your people. I'm at war with you. And a lot of the officials in Washington, D.C. were saying, look, you got a towel on your head. You live in a cave. Ha, ha, ha. You're nothing serious. Well, then on September 11th, 2001, when we had several thousand Americans die very hideous deaths at the hands of this individual, finally, the U.S. government woke up and said, yeah, no kidding, he was at war with us. We need to have the same recognition of what the People's Republic of China's war against us, how that falls out, what that looks like. And we can't do that based on our own lack of education. No one in senior U.S. Department of Defense schools teaches PRC political warfare. No one at the academies, of course. But when your national war colleges, your Army War College, your Naval War College, your National Defense University isn't preparing us on the military side, then you have a flawed defense strategy that can't respond to the political warfare that the PLA is waging very effectively against us and co-opting, incidentally, retired former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was co-opted under what we call a liaison program, a United Front program, and as well as a number of other senior American military officers. Same issue on the State Department side. The Schultz Center, the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia, they don't teach it. Go talk to them, interview them and say, how do you prepare either our entry-level diplomats, our foreign service officers, or the ones coming back from mid-level training or other training, how do you prepare them to deal with the existential threat posed by Beijing with its political warfare? The existential threat being, again, they're trying to destroy our country, again, Taiwan is the major target, but every one of our friends and allies. How are we preparing our diplomats to do that? We're not.
Well, why not?
Complacency. We won the Cold War. So at the end of the Cold War, we shut down our capabilities to fight on the information battlefield effectively. We shut down the U.S. Information Agency. Arguably, it had gotten soft, it had gotten rotten inside, it needed to be reformed, it did not need to be shut down. The State Department was ill-equipped psychologically, ideologically, and in terms of manpower to take on that mantle, especially when it looked like we were, Chris, at the end of history. We didn't need to worry about totalitarian regimes anymore. Everything was going to be peace, love, happiness, and flowers, and so we didn't need that capability. Now, that's the downside. We have become complacent. We don't have the education system in either our government institutions or our civilian academic institutions. Go to Georgetown, go to any of the other universities that pump out our future diplomats. See what programs they have to address political warfare. Pretty much non-existent. So the downside is we are totally unprepared. We have generations of diplomats, generations of Department of Commerce personnel, at least since 1992, they're not getting any preparation to deal with this, and hence they can't recognize it. A problem within our country, but a problem also within our friends and allies. Most of them can't recognize it, or if they can recognize it, they have zero capacity to fight back.
Well, I think the Chinese Communist Party would accuse you of a Cold War mentality.
I'm saddened, I'm hurt, I'm angered, and I'm irked, which is the way that they have conditioned our news media and many of our, again, government officials to respond to anything that is along the lines of what I just said about China. Any criticism of China, we have become conditioned in many cases to do anything we can to not anger, irk, or upset China. I get those three words specifically because if you look at Reuters headlines, routinely they'll always have a headline such as, "In a move guaranteed to anger, irk, or upset China, President Tsai, for example, from Taiwan, has said she wants democracy and not one country, two systems for Taiwan." Reuters could just as easily have written, "In a move designed to hearten, give hope to the free people of Taiwan, President Tsai has said, we want freedom, we want democracy, we don't want one country, two systems." But again, our news media, many of our academics, our think tank world has been infiltrated. It's been co-opted in many ways. Many in there have allowed themselves to condition to have their thoughts controlled, where they instinctively will say what China wants them to say so as not to upset China, or in some cases not to upset the flow of funding from Chinese organizations.
So based on what you're saying, it's not so much that the Chinese Communist Party is forcing people to act in a way they want. It's more that they are manipulating them to, of their own accord, do what the Communist Party
Precisely.
wants.
Psychological manipulation that gets people to the point that they will do instinctively what they think that China, the CCP, wants them to do so as not to offend China. So what you have then is preemptive actions. For example, we've seen this within our own Department of State, where a lot of the policies that restrict interaction with free and democratic Taiwan, they were never the result of any agreements with Beijing. They weren't even presidential level directives. They were just self-imposed restraints, increasingly oppressive over the years within the U.S. government bureaucracy that restrained us from what we could do to support this country to survive. That extended everything from the arms sales that the Taiwan Relations Act was supposed to. They were supposed to go on routinely. Well, somehow they went back to almost zero for a total of 8 years. And as far as interaction, ship visits even, they're not, there's no agreement that says we can't send a ship to Kaohsiung, a U.S. military ship to Kaohsiung. There's a lot of...
The southern city in Taiwan.
The southern city, the major port in southern Taiwan. There's all kinds of interaction. They could be, that was prohibited because it's self-restraint under what I would call the red matrix. I didn't come up with that term, but the red matrix is you live in the matrix-like world where you just do everything you think will please China. We can't say anything bad about China. We can't call China totalitarian. We can't call China fascist. I've seen this in the think tank world. I used to work there. We can't even call it a dictatorship. Well, why? Merriam-Webster are on our side in this case. Look up the definition of fascist. Look up the definition of totalitarian. Every element in Merriam-Webster, the PRC fulfills. Dictatorship, that's written right in its constitution. Yet I've heard people in the think tank world and even U.S. government officials saying, well, we won't call it a dictatorship publicly. We just can't say that about China. It's the Lord Voldemort syndrome that we see. We grew up with Harry Potter. A lot of my students grow up with Harry Potter. They understand the concept. We can't say Lord Voldemort's name because bad things will happen. Well, we see under this red matrix, this self-censorship, the Lord Voldemort syndrome in play, not just in the United States, not just in academia here in Taiwan in many cases, it's throughout the world. So the PRC, to give the PRC credit where credit is due, its political warfare has been tremendously successful worldwide in many cases. Now you could say, well, the election outcome the other day shows that it wasn't perfect. No, but it's still ongoing. They see political warfare as a perpetual struggle. Okay, there's ebbs and flows. We don't have to go kinetic. We don't have to go to mid-intensity conflict, but we're going to keep the struggle going perpetually until we win.
Well, all right, so let's get specific. What is the Chinese Communist Party doing as far as political warfare goes in Taiwan?
In Taiwan, they've co-opted a lot of the news media. They've bought, for example, this is through surrogates. Everything's a little bit hard to prove in a court of law, but in reality, those in the know what's going on. For example, radio stations down south where they don't read newspapers as much, but the radio in the rural areas is very important. They bought many radio stations that used to be either pro-Taiwan or certainly pro-freedom and democracy. Now you see a very heavy influence of PRC propaganda being broadcast over those radio stations. Want times the different news media, either online and or print, that they've been bought or co-opted here. So you've got the news media, you've got from the mainland massive social media attacks and social media infiltration, pretending to be either concerned Taiwanese, pretending to be even Americans. There's all kinds of ways they're trying to influence on the very extensive social media battleground. Infiltration of academia. There are certainly professors who have gone what we call pan-red here. Political parties, for those who aren't familiar with Taiwan, DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, is pan-green. The KMT is pan-blue. Well, there's another party. There's other colors as well in this color spectrum of political parties here. But the ones who've gone over to the PRC, the ones who are pro-quote reunification, and that's a misnomer, but we'll use the PRC term. The ones who are pro-reunification and want to do it tomorrow on Beijing's terms, so we call them pan-reds. So even they have infiltrated academia, and they have a tremendous influence, or at least tremendous capability to influence the young people of Taiwan, because you have to get A's from those professors. You have to get their recommendations if you want to go on for master's degrees, if you want to go on for PhD. In many cases, they dictate your success or failure in academia. If you do what they want, go along, you get along. If you don't do what they want, and what they want is for you to support the PRC, you have trouble.
Well, so what is Taiwan doing about this?
Taiwan has begun to take some steps. Taiwan is at a disadvantage just like the United States, because at the end of the Cold War, when we dismantled our capability to fight on the political warfare battlefields, then that was around the time that Taiwan was democratizing, and they were able to speak freely about the White Terror, which was the era when the KMT ruled with an iron hand and basically slaughtered a lot of people here and repressed civil rights and repressed, used rule of law to oppress people rather than to provide them what we would expect a democracy to provide. Well, around the 1980s, the son of Chiang Kai-shek, to his great credit, who had been schooled, incidentally, Chiang and his son had been schooled in Leninist political warfare and in Leninist tactics within the Soviet Union, but he helped lead his country to democracy. With the ability to publicly speak about that, that really vicious era of repression, in my mind, this country went too far the other way in eliminating laws, eliminating capabilities that would allow them to detect, expose, and take appropriate legal action against infiltration. Rather recently, last month, I believe, was the end of the last year, at the end of December, the anti-infiltration law was passed. That is a massive first step in helping to cut down the amount of money and the amount of influence that could come in from overseas, affecting, for example, elections. Much more needs to be done, though, in terms of educating the public, educating government officials, educating business leaders about the threats posed by PRC political warfare.
So why should Americans be concerned about what the Chinese Communist Party is trying to do in Taiwan?
Well, first of all, Taiwan is an existential threat to the CCP. Americans are slowly beginning to realize that we're in strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. They don't understand fully that the PRC is at war with us. Where Taiwan plays a very important role is, again, it poses the existential threat to the Chinese Communist Party because it shows that Chinese people can rule themselves in a democracy. It is the narrative from the CCP that Chinese people can't have freedom, can't have democracy, can't rule themselves. They need the jackboot of oppression to keep the country from fragmenting and having all the splitists split and the country devolving into chaos. Now, Taiwan proves Chinese people can rule themselves and they can survive with dignity and they can survive with prosperity under that democratic rule. So that's one of the many reasons. There are several reasons that Beijing wants to take Taiwan. For Americans, they have to realize we need to stand by democracies worldwide, and especially Taiwan. Taiwan has stood up heroically and almost alone to the CCP. If Taiwan can stand up, just like the Hong Kong protesters have been, they've achieved some remarkable things, especially with the elections in Hong Kong. If Taiwan can continue to stand up against an expansionist, brutally repressive, fascist, totalitarian regime, that gives hope to democracies around the world. America must support Taiwan. For our own self-interest and the interests of Japan, Republic of Korea, all those Association of Southeast Asian nations, the ASEAN nations in the region, you best hope Taiwan doesn't fall, because if this island falls to the PRC, then it becomes a power projection platform. They don't care about the people of Taiwan and Beijing. I think they'll treat them like Zhongshan, they'll treat them like East Turkestan. They'll have concentration camps. I think they'll do the worst they can to punish them if they do reunify. That's my personal opinion. But more importantly, rather than even dealing with the people, what the PLA, what the CCP also wants this island for, submarine pens, airfields, so they can project power further into the South China Sea, into Oceania, where they have frankly, a neo-colonialization effort going on throughout the Pacific Islands, and massive influence, malign influence campaigns in Australia and New Zealand. They can support those political warfare campaigns in Oceania, Pacific Islands, down to Australia and New Zealand with military power better now, not just the PLA Navy, but strategic bombers out of Taiwan, strategic other vessels and power projection forces based here. So the countries who are democracies, those countries that are democracies around the world, best support a democracy like Taiwan, David against Goliath here, but also those countries that even are authoritarian in the Asia-Pacific region, but do not want to be under the jackboot of Beijing's oppression, they best hope that Taiwan does not fall and become a power projection base for the People's Liberation Army.
Well, I know the Chinese Communist Party would say that it's really the United States that's the real troublemaker in the Pacific. How would you respond to people who argue that the United States is actually the worst aggressor?
You know, I lose a lot of sleep over that accusation by Beijing. It's tormented me. It haunts me. That
Irks you?
it irks. Yeah, it upsets me as well. Look, it's one of many propaganda narratives, and it's successful in some places. I've seen the success that they've had infiltrating in the countries that are supposedly friends and allies of America. They've done a pretty good job of infiltrating on social media, and people buy into that line that we're the troublemaker. The reality is we're the only guarantor of freedom, democracy, rule of law, post-Westphalian rights within this region. If America is not here, and to use the PRC lexicon, making trouble, that is standing up for democracies like Taiwan, like Japan, like the Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand. If we're not here, no one else will have the strength to do it. And so what we have seen what has happened in the past when totalitarian regimes have marched forward and no one stood up. You know, peace in our time. We remember the appeasement in Europe in the 1930s when no one was willing to stand up to Hitler. We'll just give him the Sudetenland, okay? We don't, Czechoslovakia, that's fine. He'll be happy. He'll be happy. No, they're never happy. So we cannot appease. We must confront. We must stop the forward march, the expansionism. We must be able to counter the political warfare, which is, again, their primary means of winning what they want to achieve. We need to effectively counter it. And then we have a chance of surviving. Taiwan will be able to survive. The other democracies will. But they cannot do it on their own. The United States, just as in the Cold War, the United States has to be the leader, the unifying force, the powerful country that can give encouragement, give material support, give psychological support, other types of support to those nations standing up against the totalitarian regime that is on the march.
So if anyone watching wanted to learn more about you or political warfare, where should they go?
Well, they can Google my name. They can, in political warfare, the number of articles will come up, about 20 in the past year and a half. And they also can go to Project 2049 Institute. They can go to the Global Taiwan Institute. They can go to the Hudson Institute. Now you're beginning to see good organizations like the three, and there's more, exposing PRC political warfare. They've all done some very good work on political warfare. Not enough, though. We need to encourage master's candidates. We need to encourage PhD candidates at the university level to do their theses on the issue. It's not just do it on soft power or hard power, or now with the popular term is sharp power. No, do it on political warfare. That's the real battle that we're fighting. Delve into it. Professors need to encourage that. So professors need to get out of the Lord Voldemort syndrome and start looking into it themselves, the whole issue themselves. And again, government officials, if government grants start flowing to academic institutions and think tanks to pursue this and come up with solutions, how can we effectively counter it? How can we effectively fight and win on the information battlefield to counter PRC political warfare? You'll start seeing a lot more intellectual effort being invested into this.
And as I understand, you do have a book you're working on?
Got a book that will be published sometime in late spring or early June. I'll give you more information on it when it's published, but at this point, it's coming along very nicely, and it will address a large part of what we talked about today, but in substantive detail with somewhere around 400 footnotes. So,
well, fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks for being here.
Honor to be here with you.